You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Sports fans, welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And at the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with Neal Golden, the author of the book on LSU Bowl Games. It was very interesting. He's a very smart guy. But you know what I have to start with. My Super Bowl 55 preview. It's finally time for it. I haven't talked about the Super Bowl before. And that's been by design. I don't want to repeat the same storylines over and over and over again. That's unnecessary. No, save it for the show right before the big game. That's the right way to do it, in my opinion. As promised, I'm going to be breaking down all the big storylines from this game. And there's no bigger storyline than this. What does it mean for Brady's legacy if he beats Mahomes? And vice versa. It's something that's been debated about a lot. Where does Brady rank on the all-time list of best NFL players ever? Where does Mahomes rank on the list of best NFL players ever if he beats Brady? You know, some people have brought up the fact that this is the fifth matchup between Brady and Mahomes. They look at those games as being harbingers of things to come. That's not the right way to do it. Once those lights are on bright, on Super Bowl Sunday, nothing else matters. You think Brady's going to care that he lost to the Chiefs a little over 2 months ago? I guarantee you that's the farthest thing from his mind right now. The true test for these guys is Sunday. What are you going to do when the Lombardi Trophy's on the line? That's the correct way to define legacies. If Tom Brady wins on Sunday, forget Joe Montana, forget John Elway, forget Peyton Manning, forget Drew Brees, forget Aaron Rodgers, forget Emmitt Smith, forget Jim Brown, forget Jerry Rice. Tom Brady will be, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the greatest player in NFL history. It's not even an argument. He already has that title, in my opinion. But some people don't think he is. And that's fine. That's a reasonable argument at this very moment. And if he loses on Sunday, it'll be a fair argument. And you'll see all the people saying, see, look, without Belichick, Brady couldn't win the big game. It doesn't matter that he beat Washington, New Orleans, and Green Bay. He couldn't win the Super Bowl without Bill Belichick. Basically giving no credit to Brady for getting to the Super Bowl, something that certain fan bases would kill for. Doesn't mean anything if he doesn't win. No, that's not how it works. Brady would still be the greatest player in NFL history, in my opinion, but there would be other people who disagree. They'd say guys like Montana, Rice, Lawrence Taylor, Bruce Smith, whoever you want to say. If he wins on Sunday, it's not an argument. It's fact that Tom Brady is the greatest football player of all time. The guy will have won his 7th Super Bowl. More than any team in NFL history. Think about that for a second. A player will have more Super Bowls than any football team ever. That has never happened in sports history. The guys who won a lot throughout the history of sports, Yogi Berra, Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Jean Beliveau, Henri Richard, Bill Russell, Sam Jones, Casey Jones, Tom Heinsohn. They're nowhere near having more championships than all teams do. Yogi Berra won 10 World Series as a player, 3 as a coach. Nowhere near the 27 World Series that the Yankees have. Henri Richard has the most Stanley Cups in NHL history by a player, with 11. That's nowhere near the 24 Stanley Cups that the Canadians have. Bill Russell won 11 NBA titles. The record for most NBA titles by a franchise is held by the Celtics and Lakers. They're at 17. So is Russell close? The answer is yes, but he still doesn't have more. 17 is more than 11. The teams with the most wins in a Super Bowl in history are the Patriots and Steelers. They're tied with 6. Obviously, Brady was the quarterback of all 6 of those Patriots teams. So if he wins here, he moves past the Patriots and Steelers. He'll have 7 rings, more than any team. That makes him the GOAT. It's a level of dominance that we've never seen in sports history. I don't care if Brady has a subpar performance on Sunday. If the Buccaneers win, it's just fact that Tom Brady will be the greatest player in NFL history. And it's not even close. He can also become the 2nd starting quarterback ever, with Peyton Manning being the 1st, to win a Super Bowl for 2 teams. As it stands right now, Brady will be the 4th quarterback to start in a Super Bowl for multiple teams. Manning, Kurt Warner, and Craig Morton. And for time immemorial, he will be able to shake the notion that he was just a system quarterback. At the end of the day, there will be people saying, why couldn't Brady win the big one without Belichick? Like Belichick never lost in a Super Bowl. It's unfair. The reality is, whatever Brady does, you'll still have people saying he's just pick 199. They'll still say, hey, he wouldn't have won those Super Bowls without Belichick. I mean, they're right. They're right that Brady will always be pick 199. It's not like we can redo the draft and he goes first overall. And yeah, some of those Super Bowls he probably doesn't win without Belichick. But you know what? He still has those rings. Just because Belichick was there doesn't negate the fact that Brady was the quarterback of 6 Super Bowl winning teams. It's a symbiotic relationship. Brady wouldn't have been as good without Belichick, and Belichick wouldn't have been as good without Brady. Look, we'll never know what the Patriots would have done with Brady at quarterback and someone else as head coach. Pete Carroll, Bill Parcells, Ron Meyer, whoever. The reality is, Brady and Belichick, for time immemorial, will always be linked. But the simple fact is, Brady will have more Super Bowls than Belichick does as a head coach if he wins on Sunday. That makes him the greatest of all time. That makes Brady the correct answer to that question. I don't care who else you bring up. They all pale in comparison to Brady. And just one more thing on Brady's legacy if he wins on Sunday. This Chiefs team may be the best Super Bowl opponent he's ever had. I mean, I was thinking about it. This Chiefs team is better than the 03 Panthers. They're better than the 04 Eagles. They're better than the 2 Giants teams that beat the Patriots. They're better than the 2014 Seahawks. They're better than the 2016 Falcons. They're better than the 2017 Eagles. And they're better than the 2018 Rams. The only team that you can make the argument is better than this Chiefs team out of all of Brady's Super Bowl opponents is the 01 Rams. You had the greatest show on turf. They go 14-2. They're undefeated on the road. Kurt Warner wins his second MVP. Marshall Faulk made the Pro Bowl. So did Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Orlando Pace, Adam Timmerman, and Aeneas Williams, who just so happened to be the best player on a really, really good defense that year. Give Lovie Smith a ton of credit for what he did that year. Took over a terrible defense, whipped them into shape, and helped get them to the Super Bowl. But it's close as to what team is better. That Rams team or this Chiefs team? It's really, really close. I mean, I'll say this. Patrick Mahomes is probably the best player in the NFL today. Kurt Warner wasn't. Marshall Faulk wasn't. Andy Reid is a better coach than Mike Martz. you can certainly make the argument that this Chiefs team is better than the 0-1 Rams. So if Brady beats this Chiefs team at the age of 43, he will have beaten his best Super Bowl opponent ever. If all that doesn't make him the GOAT, I don't know what does. But if the Chiefs win, if Mahomes wins, we're having a very different conversation. The conversation isn't who's the greatest player in NFL history. The conversation is who's going to be the greatest player in NFL history. When everything is said and done, 30 years from now, who's going to be the GOAT? I'll say this. If Mahomes wins on Sunday, he's on that trajectory to be the greatest player in NFL history. This guy is 25 years old, and he will already have 2 Super Bowls. He's going to accumulate God knows how many individual awards between now and when he retires. This isn't it for Mahomes. He's gonna be back. Regardless of what happens on Sunday, Patrick Mahomes will make another Super Bowl. And if he gets all the individual accolades, all the awards, all the records, and beats Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, if you peer into the crystal ball, there is a future where Mahomes is widely regarded as the greatest player in NFL history. The simple fact is we're looking at a modern day dynasty. Just as the Patriots dynasty dies, a new dynasty rises, the Chiefs dynasty. I am not saying that they are going to be as successful as the Patriots. I am not saying they're going to make 9 Super Bowls and win 6 of them. But I am saying that if Mahomes wins on Sunday, he's on that trajectory. I mean, who do you see stopping the Chiefs going forward? This group of NFL quarterbacks, Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, Roethlisberger, they're going to call it quits soon. Who's going to stop the Chiefs from dominating the NFL like the Patriots did? The Ravens? No. The Browns? Possibly. The Rams? God only knows. I have no idea what Stafford's going to do. The only thing that I can say with confidence is that we're looking at a lot of future Chiefs-Bills AFC Championship games. If the Chiefs win on Sunday, it really could be the start of the next great NFL dynasty. People have said, don't try to emulate the Patriots. You're never going to be able to duplicate their success. If any team can, it's the Chiefs. If any player can duplicate Brady's success, it's Mahomes. And another Super Bowl win basically guarantees that Andy Reid is going into the Hall of Fame. If he's not already a guarantee to get in, he would get my vote if he retired tomorrow and let Bieniemy coach the Super Bowl. But if you're still on the fence about it, if he wins on Sunday, you won't be on the fence any longer. Reid would have the regular season wins. He'd have the multiple Super Bowls. Yeah. Mahomes winning on Sunday doesn't just help his legacy, it helps Reid's legacy. And speaking of multiple Super Bowl wins and getting into the Hall of Fame, Tom Flores is a finalist for the Pro Football Hall of Fame this year. He could get in tomorrow night. I said on this show that I was borderline about his candidacy, and I probably would vote against him. I'm changing that. One thing that I didn't realize about Flores, and I should have, is that he was the first Hispanic starting quarterback in professional football history, and is the first minority head coach in professional football history to win a Super Bowl. That gets him over the hump to me. He's a Hall of Famer. I should have dug deeper into it. I'm changing my mind. I'm changing my vote. Flores gets in. That doesn't knock anyone else out, for whatever it's worth. But now on to the actual game's storylines. How both teams are going to play on Sunday. How can both teams win? If the Buccaneers are going to win, and this is the matchup that I'm looking forward to the most, they need Todd Bowles' incredibly overrated defense to slow down Mahomes. They've got to bring pressure. They've got to make Mahomes uncomfortable. They've got to put him on his back. This is a banged-up Chiefs offensive line. Realize, no Eric Fisher and no Mitchell Schwartz. So from left to right, the Chiefs offensive line is going to be Mike Remmers, Nick Allegretti, Austin Ritter, Stefan Wisniewski, and Andrew Wiley. That's not a great offensive line. It's not awful. Remmers, Allegretti, and Ritter are solid players. But Wisniewski and Wiley, in a perfect world, wouldn't be starting. Wiley has been the weak link on the Chiefs O-line this year. And now he has to slide over to tackle. He's going to have to deal with Shaq Barrett, possibly. JPP, possibly. The Buccaneers pass rushers should have a field day against this banged-up Chiefs O-line. The one thing about Todd Bowles that I'll give him credit for is he knows when to blitz. Has a very good feel for that. That great sense of timing is really going to help the Buccaneers on Sunday. And yes, I said that Todd Bowles' defense is overrated. I stand by that. In the 3 playoff games this year, the Buccaneers have given up at least 20 points in all of them. They've given up over 300 yards total in all 3 games. And think about the quarterbacks that the Buccaneers were going up against. Taylor Heineke, a way past his prime Drew Brees in hopefully his final game, and Aaron Rodgers. I understand you can only beat the teams that you're put up against. And I'm not trying to diminish what the Buccaneers have accomplished. They're the NFC champions, alright? No one can take that away from them. But this Buccaneers defense is being hailed as one of the best in the NFL. It's not. It's an overrated defense. It's certainly in the top half of NFL defenses, but it's not the best in the NFL. It's really not even close to that. Todd Bowles is massively overrated. There is another matchup, though, from the Buccaneers defense to the Chiefs offense that I'm going to be looking forward to. Levante David and or Devin White going up against Travis Kelce. You've got Kelce, this wide receiver that plays tight end. Let's be honest. You could put Kelce at wide receiver and he'd hold his own. Kelce feasts on these inferior linebackers that match up against him. And give the Chiefs credit for always scheming him open. Since George Kittle missed half the season, Kelce is the best tight end in the NFL. But he's going to have his hands full against David and White. David will be able to cover Kelce, and White will be able to bring him down. I'd be surprised if you saw Kelce run roughshod in this game. He'll still get hits. He's Travis Kelce. But I do think his effectiveness will be limited somewhat. It's going to be up to guys like Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, assuming he plays. He's on track to play, but still, with the coronavirus, anything can happen. And even a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire to step up and compensate for that, because I do think Kelce will be limited. The big question that I have for the Chiefs is, can they have another Super Bowl winning comeback? Can they have another playoff comeback? The Chiefs were down 9-0 after one to the Bills. After that, there was a stretch where the Chiefs outscored the Bills 38-6. Even last year, entering the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl, the Niners are up 10. The Chiefs dropped 21 in the fourth quarter. Can the Chiefs do that again? I'll say this. No coach likes to be behind, but Patrick Mahomes seems to thrive under it. I think he likes being behind the 8 ball in that respect. He just seems to thrive under it. There are some teams that thrive when they're the underdog. The Chiefs may be one of those teams. I know that the Chiefs are favored in this game by 3, but you get the point I'm making. If the Chiefs are going to win this game, they need their secondary to slow down these great Buccaneers pass catchers. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson, Rob Gronkowski, and Cameron Brate. Now, make no mistake about it, the Chiefs have the secondary to do it. Bashaud Breeland has had a really underrated postseason. Same thing with a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, Juan Thornhill, and Daniel Sorensen. But that secondary is going to have their hands full against these great Buccaneers pass catchers. It's going to be very interesting to see what Steve Spagnuolo's defense does against them. I will say this. If you believe in omens, Spags has beaten Brady in the Super Bowl before. He was the Giants' defensive coordinator when they put the 1 in 18-1. Also, another Patriots connection, if the Chiefs win on Sunday, they'll be the first team to win back-to-back Super Bowls since the 03-04 Patriots. The 03 Patriots beat the Panthers, led by John Fox, and the 04 Patriots beat the Eagles, led by Andy Reid. How's that for symmetry? Now on to a couple miscellaneous notes. If you're going to have a Super Bowl in a participant stadium, let it be when there are limited fans allowed in. At the end of the day, it is unfair to the Chiefs that they have to go to Tampa to play Tampa in the Super Bowl. At least the stadium will only be partially filled. The stadium crew won't do as much as they usually do for Buccaneers home games. That is the right way to do it. It was inevitable that we were going to have a Super Bowl in a participant stadium. But it's good that it's finally happening in this coronavirus climate. Because at the end of the day, it is unfair to the other team. And speaking of the coronavirus, you've got to give the NFL a ton of credit. There were moments when the Titans had their outbreak and when the Ravens had their outbreak. Cases were spiking all over the country. It seemed like the NFL wasn't going to be able to get through a full season. But they did. Every team played at least 16 games. The playoff games went off without a hitch. Even though the league had to rejigger some games, and for the first time in NFL history, one season had games played on all 7 days of the week. We got it done. We got through it. Whether you like Roger Goodell or you hate Roger Goodell, you've got to commend him for getting this season done. For putting in place protocols and testing procedures that got this done. Even though it was touch and go at some points, we're there. We're at the finish line. It's done. The season's gonna conclude on Sunday. We'll get a champion where no one can put an asterisk on him. Commissioner Goodell, job well done. Before the season, I said that the Buccaneers would lose in the Super Bowl. I had a Ravens-Buccaneers Super Bowl. I had the Ravens winning it. Everyone was picking the Chiefs. I wanted to be different. So I got half of my prediction right. Give me credit for that. And you know what? I'm going to stick with it. I just don't think the Buccaneers are as talented as the Chiefs. At this point in time, I'll take Mahomes over Brady. This may be a controversial opinion, but I don't care. I think the Chiefs' defense is better than the Buccaneers' defense. I think it's going to be a really good Super Bowl. I think we're in for a close game all throughout. I think the Buccaneers will have the lead at some point, but the Chiefs will win by a score of 27-20. All right, here's my interview with Neal Golden. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Neal Golden, the author of LSU Bowl Games, A Complete History. Neal, how are you?
I'm fine.
All right. So, what can you tell us about the 1907 Bacardi Bowl?
Well, it's not officially recognized by the NCAA, but LSU, after the football season ended, got a invitation from the Cuban ambassador in New Orleans to come to Cuba and play a Christmas Day game against a collection of Cuban college players. I mean, who knew that Cuba even was playing football in 1907? And I decided to include it in the book and start it off because everything's in chronological order because it was so interesting and fortunately, there were a lot of stories in the newspapers and so on about all the things they kind of wined and dined the LSU players, and there were lots of temptations and all of that. And it was less than 10 years after the Spanish-American War, so there were some tensions, and so it was a very interesting experience. And the Tigers won, and they were known by as Tigers at that point. So it provides an interesting story and a nice way to start off the book.
Yeah, here's an interesting fact about the Bacardi Bowl. Every single Bacardi Bowl that was completed ended in a shutout. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Was it always the American team that did the shutting out?
No, twice. The Cuban Athletic Club won. They beat Tulane once and Ole Miss once. Let's go to a bowl game that's a little more familiar, still old, but still recognizable. Can you lay out the 1936 to 38 Sugar Bowls?
Yeah, those were LSU's first official bowl games, all in New Orleans, and they lost every one of them. And very frustrating. The 36 game that started off, they played TCU, which had a future Hall of Fame quarterback named Sammy Baugh. Although they didn't throw the ball as much as we think of teams today, he was really he was called Slingin' Sammy because of, in those days, if you threw 15 passes in a game, you were considered avant-garde, So, and the LSU kept getting in the rain and muddy field and kept getting down near the goal line. And the coach, Bernie Moore, just refused to kick a field goal, maybe because of the wet conditions. I never could find in any newspaper searches any explanation from him of why he kept refusing to kick field goals, because they had gotten a safety when Baugh went to pass from the end zone, which was really radical, and the ball slipped out of his hands and landed in the end zone, which they called a safety in those days. Probably today you could have fallen on the ball and gotten a touchdown. But then TCU came down and got a field goal, so they were leading 3-2 all through the second half, and LSU kept getting within easy field goal range, like inside the 5-yard line, and he just refused to send someone that kick a field goal, and they ended up never did score again, and lost the game 3-2. Then in 37 and 38, they played the same team, Santa Clara, which today is known only maybe in basketball circles, but in those days, they were actually somewhat of a power on the West Coast. And they were coached by a man named Buck Shaw, who later would lead the Philadelphia Eagles to the 1960 NFL championship, the only championship game that Vince Lombardi ever lost with the Green Bay Packers. And again, the Southern writers, of course, thought that, there's no team from out on the West Coast that can come in here and beat our Tigers or any of the top Southern teams. But again, LSU committed turnovers and lost the game 21-14. And then the following year, LSU wanted to go to another bowl. I mean, you got to consider LSU played in New Orleans every other year when they played Tulane. So a trip down, 90 miles down the road to the Sugar Bowl was no big deal. They wanted to go to the Orange Bowl or the Cotton Bowl. The Rose Bowl was out of the question, of course. Right. And but it never did work out, so they had to keep settling for the Sugar Bowl. And the players, you kind of get the impression from reading at the time that the players were not that enthusiastic. In other words, the visiting team, was a lot more hepped up about the game to beat the mighty LSU or beat the Southern team than LSU was excited about beating them. So they lost again 6-0. So that was a very disappointing string of games.
So let's move away from Sugar Bowls for a little bit. Would you be able to describe the 1947 Cotton Bowl?
It was called the Ice Bowl.
The Ice Bowl before the Ice Bowl.
What?
The Ice Bowl before the Ice Bowl. The Ice Bowl that everyone thinks about is the NFL game. This was the Ice Bowl before the Ice Bowl.
Which then the other game had a Dallas team in it, but it was a professional Dallas team, and this was in Dallas, in what is still the Cotton Bowl Stadium, and sheet of ice on the field. The morning of the game, they had kept a tarpaulin on it, and they plowed the snow over to the sidelines, but it was still very, very cold and not very good conditions. And again, LSU had one of their best teams ever. You look at the players on it and the ones who went to the pros, and neither team was able to score, so it ended in a scoreless tie. The LSU quarterback was a guy named Y.A. Tittle, who is famous to pro football fans with the 49ers and then the New York Giants, and in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. LSU, again, got very close a couple of times. Bernie, again, going for the touchdowns instead of the field goals. And so the game, LSU was a double-digit favorite over an Arkansas team that had several losses and ended up in a tie. So that was another disappointing one. Fortunately, in between these last two bowls we discussed was their first bowl victory in the 1944 Orange Bowl, when a guy named Steve Van Buren, another future NFL Hall of Famer, led them to victory in their second game that season against Texas A&M in a year when the war caused the teams, a lot of teams didn't even have field squads in that year, the 43 season. And so it's hard to find opponents, so the Orange Bowl matched them up for a second time.
Talking to Neal Golden, the author of LSU Bowl Games, A Complete History. So let's get to a couple bowl games that featured probably the best player in LSU history. What can you tell us about the 1959 and 1960 Sugar Bowls?
Well, LSU fans have totally opposite memories from those games. The 59 Sugar Bowl, which ended the 58 season, LSU had gone undefeated under Paul Dietzel and his 3-team system, which he invented to skirt the very limited substitution rules in those days. Basically, if you started a quarter in the game, you could come out and go back in that quarter. But if you didn't start the quarter and you went into the game, if you left the game during that quarter, you could not go back in until the next quarter. So you really couldn't have specialists like a place-kicking specialist. So he invented the 3-platoon system, and then he would substitute by platoons, and he had the first team called the white team, which played both ways. That was his best 11 players, all-around players. And then he had the go team, which were offensive specialists that he could send in for an offensive drive and then put the first string back in. And he had the Chinese bandits, who became the most famous of the group, which were defensive specialists. And that's how he got around the restrictions, and that meant that he was playing 33 players when other teams were playing maybe at most 22. And so LSU often just outwore them down. So they went into the 59 Sugar Bowl against Clemson. Now, Clemson had several losses, and the national media was all over the Sugar Bowl for not coming up with a better opponent for LSU. And we're even saying that LSU might lose your number 1 ranking, even if you beat Clemson, because they're not that impressive a team. And, of course, that did nothing more but rile up the Clemson team, which was much bigger than LSU. LSU was known for its speed, not necessarily for its size. They had some big guys, but mostly they were just such a fast team on both sides of the ball. And it was a tough game, and Clemson corralled Billy Cannon pretty well, and LSU had ended up winning only 7-0, and it cost them the number 1 spot in one of the polls, which put Iowa, which won the Rose Bowl, ahead of them. But you know how it goes. If you're at the top in any poll, Joe Blow's poll, we were national champs that year, so they preserved their undefeated record. And the next year is famous for Cannon's run. Some people think that occurred in the undefeated year, but it did not. That was the next year when they played Ole Miss, and Ole Miss totally dominated the game in Tiger Stadium. And, it's one of the most famous plays in college football history. I think ESPN at the turn of the century had it listed near the top of the 100 most famous college football plays of the century.
The Halloween run.
The Halloween night, right.
Yep.
And Ole Miss punted and was actually trying to punt out of bounds, but the ball happened to bounce to Cannon. And he had been instructed by Dietzel the whole time Dietzel was coach, if it's inside the 15-yard line, don't field it. Either fair catch it or just let it roll. Well, it hit inside the 15, but it bounced right to him, so off he went, and he ran through about 7 Ole Miss tacklers down the sideline. And probably almost any college football fan has seen that run in replay. So they beat Ole Miss 7-3, but Ole Miss actually dominated the game. Ole Miss had a huge number of players who eventually played in the pros, and so the next week was very disappointing. LSU went to Tennessee, thoroughly outplayed Tennessee, but Cannon fumbled a punt and on his 20-yard line. Tennessee got a touchdown. LSU threw an interception that the guy ran back for a touchdown, and now LSU's losing 14-7 in the fourth quarter, even though they were running up and down the field. And so they scored. Cannon scored a touchdown, and then they went for 2, and he swore the rest of his life that he made it, but the official ruled that he was short, and they lost 14-13. And that totally took the heart out of the team. First of all, they were worn down from the season. and that just kind of took the heart out of them. They had 2 lackluster wins, and then lo and behold, the Sugar Bowl wants them to play Ole Miss again, and they wanted no part of that. They didn't want to play in a bowl game at all, but they played it, and the results showed. They lost 21-0, and it wasn't much of a contest. So one ended a great season, and the other Sugar Bowl, ended a very disappointing season.
Do you agree with the notion that Billy Cannon is the best player in LSU history?
Up until the 19th season, I would have said that. But I think now I'll go with Joe Burrow.
You'll go with Burrow? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll get to Burrow in a little bit, but I have some other questions before we get to him.
Well,
Can
one
you
more thing
lay out...
on that. I just want to add that it's very difficult to compare players from the 50s with, players from this century because the offenses are so wide open. Who knows how much yardage Billy Cannon could have gained in today's game with so many more plays, such wide open offense, no huddle offenses. But based on how they performed in their era, they both were great, of course.
And imagine how stifled Burrow would have been if he played in the late 50s.
Yeah, we wouldn't have had a Joe Burrow because there were no quarterbacks that were given the opportunity to do what he was doing.
Right. So can you lay out the 1963 Cotton Bowl?
That was against Darrell Royal and Texas. Dietzel had left. He went to West Point, which he had said, I'll never leave LSU. But really what he meant and should have said was the only job I would leave LSU for is West Point, because he had been an assistant coach there. And now they wanted him there, so he left. And then Charlie McClendon, his assistant, took over and coached LSU for the better part of 2 decades. And this was their first bowl game under McClendon, and they played Texas. And McClendon's teams, like Dietzel's also, were always known for their defense, and they shut out Darrell Royal and Texas 13-0. Now, at that point, Texas had not gone to the wishbone yet, and ran more of a standard offense, but they were considered, the power of the Southwest Conference. The fact that they were in the Cotton Bowl shows that they were the Southwest Conference champions, and Darrell Royal was one of the great coaches, but LSU stifled them that day. LSU had another great player named Jerry Stovall, who finished second in the Heisman voting, actually not that season, but the next season, who was a great two-way player and had a long career in the pros.
Yes, he did, and he went on to coach LSU.
Yes,
Ended up losing
mixed results.
Yeah, I was going to say, he went to one bowl game and lost to Tom Osborne's Nebraska Cornhuskers.
Right.
So let's fast forward 40 years now. I know it's a big jump, but it's really important to tell the story properly of LSU to make that jump. Would you be able to describe the 2004 BCS National Championship game?
Yes, that was LSU and Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl, which by the luck of the draw that year, that the Sugar Bowl was, they rotated where the championship game was among the major bowls, and it happened to be in New Orleans, which happened to be the same place where LSU clinched their national championship after the 1958 season. And they were playing Oklahoma, and there was a big controversy that year about Oklahoma, because if you remember, Oklahoma was undefeated and just beating the tar out of everybody, but they went to the Big 12 championship game and got not only beaten by Kansas State, but beaten soundly. I think it was 35-7, something like that. And so there was a question of who would be number one, because you had USC and you had LSU. And, of course, the BCS used computers as well as human voters, and Oklahoma ended up still number one, mostly because of the computers, and then LSU was number two and edged out USC. And so that was Nick Saban coaching LSU. That was the national championship that they keep saying now after he won the last one, and he had, 6 at Alabama and 1 at LSU. Well, that was the one at LSU.
Right.
And they stifled that powerful Oklahoma offense and won 21-14 and were acclaimed BCS national champions. And, of course, USC also claimed it. And after they won the Rose Bowl, so it was controversial in that sense. But it gave us a taste of Nick Saban's coaching ability, because LSU only, in 1999 had not even been going to a bowl when he took over in 2000. So he had to rebuild the program, and they immediately resumed going to bowl games, and in 4 years he had LSU with a national championship.
Hey, don't kid yourself, Neal. Saban has a real argument to being the greatest college football coach of all time. I don't know where you stand on it, but he has a good case for it.
I would agree. It's just, galls us LSU fans that
he left for the Dolphins.
He's done, yeah. And then that story is told also somewhat because, they continue to go to bowl games, including the game the year that he was negotiating with the Dolphins. He admitted later on that he really didn't want to go to the pros. So he kept Joe Robbie, the Dolphins owner, like a lot of owners, including former Saints owner, late Saints owner Tom Benson. They were excellent salesmen, and they made a lot of money selling stuff. And Nick kept raising his offer, and Robbie kept meeting it. He was hoping that Robbie would eventually give up, and then he could stay at LSU. But Robbie kept saying, "Sure, you want that? You got it." So he ended up going, and then 2 years later realized, you can't discipline the pro athletes the way you do the college athletes, and Alabama lucked out.
Yeah,
Sorry, Alabama fans, but you just got lucky. You were all set to hire Rich Rodriguez. He was in Tuscaloosa, you were ready to sign him, and he got wind of the way I've read it. He got the feeling that the athletic director doesn't really run this program. There's these other big people that I'll have to please, so I don't think I'm going to take this job. And so he turned it down, and then that's when Saban's agent stepped in. You say, Nick's disenchanted with the pros. He's interested, and that's how he got to be the Alabama coach, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm a Jets fan. I remember Saban as Dolphins head coach. As a Jets fan, I wanted him to stay in the pros. That's how bad he was.
Yeah. Well, he made down here in New Orleans, another thing that there was a flip side to that helped us down here, and that was Drew Brees. Remember, had a choice.
Is he going to go to the Dolphins?
Severely injured his shoulder with the Chargers. And that was one of the reasons they didn't re-sign him. So he comes to New Orleans. He's trying out for various teams, and they want to know if he's healthy. He comes to New Orleans. Sean Payton has just been made the coach. We've just gone through Katrina, or would go through it, and worked out for us. He then went to Miami and worked out for Saban, and the Dolphin doctors he didn't pass his physical with them. So Saban passed on him and went with a guy named Dante Culpepper. So Breeze came back to New Orleans and signed with the Saints, and again, the rest is history.
Let me ask you something. I know this isn't an LSU question, it's a Saints question, but I'm curious. I think Breeze is going to retire. He'll start his clock to get into Canton. He's a Hall of Famer. There's no question about that. I just think he's reached the end of the line. What do you think the Saints are going to do at quarterback next year?
The word here is Peyton likes Jameis Winston.
He's going to go with Winston
for a year. The fly in the ointment is that's also telling other teams if a offensive guru like Sean Payton likes Winston, then maybe we can work with him too. You know, he put up some terrific numbers with Tampa Bay, but he was, he tried to force the ball and he would throw interceptions and he was inconsistent. Well, that's exactly the kind of quarterback, if you got the physical talents, that could use a Sean Payton, but that also means other teams would be after him. The Saints are going to have an awful lot of salary cap problems. They have a lot of guys that are in their last year, and that they are either going to be free agents or restricted free agents, and they've got an awful lot. It's a big puzzle that they're going to have to put together, and quarterback is one of those. But Payton has said, when they asked him even during the season about the possibility of Breeze retiring and what are you going to do next year, and he said, who's going to be your quarterback next year? He said he's in the building, which would mean either Hill or Winston, or I wouldn't be surprised if he wants to do again with Winston and Hill what he's been doing with Breeze and Hill, and use Hill.
I could see that.
Appropriately, but the problem is they're both going to cost a lot of money to do that, and they've got all guys on defense that were key, and lots of players that are there. You go through that 3 or 4 year period, sometimes only 2 or 3, where you're riding along fine on the salary cap, but then the bill finally comes due, and unfortunately for the Saints, after 4 years of winning the NFC South, their bill has come due. The chickens have come home to roost.
Yeah, with the help of a guy named Brady.
Yes. From what he says, and and also reading the local press, what they get from other people, Peyton would be willing to go with Hill if he lost Winston, and maybe pick up another guy to. Obviously would need another guy for the backup, but he likes Hill very much. I personally am skeptical that Hill can be the main man for a team that consistently makes the playoffs, but Peyton likes him. But until you let the guy be a starting pitcher, you don't know how he's going to do. He throws 2 good innings out of the bullpen every time, but what's he going to do as a starter?
Right. Talking to Neal Golden, the author of LSU Bowl Games, A Complete History. So let's get back to BCS national title games. I'm glad we don't have those anymore, but again, it's an important part of the story of LSU. What can you tell us about the 2008 BCS national championship game?
LSU had lost a couple of games, but everything went their way at the end of the season. Les Miles, of course, is now in his 3rd year as coach. It was Saban's first year back at Alabama, and LSU beat them the first year that he was there because he hadn't built up the program. And so everything had to fall just right on on the day when you had the conference championship games, and it fell perfectly. West Virginia lost. There was no question Ohio State was number 1, so the question was going to be who was going to end up being number 2. And West Virginia lost. I believe Kansas or Missouri lost. And everything, and LSU, of course, had to win the SEC championship game against Tennessee, and they did. And 4 things had to happen for LSU to get the number 2 spot, and all 4 things happened. So they lucked out. And then they showed that they were a very good team by beating Ohio State by double digits, which on the one hand, hooray for Les Miles, but on the other hand, how did you lose 2 games with this team, kind of thing. So it was a mixed blessing. So that was a bowl game. It was one of the last BCS championship. It was the last of one cycle, and then 4 years later, LSU played in another BCS championship game that we don't like to talk about against Alabama.
Don't worry, Don't worry,
you're going to get there.
I was about to say, I'm going to make you talk about it a little later.
It's not Lent. You don't have to make me do penance. We're already through Advent. Come on.
I just want you to get a head start on things.
Okay. So what do you want to talk about in between there?
I want to talk about the 2010 Capital One Bowl where you guys went up against Joe Paterno.
The overriding memory of that game is the field was a disgrace.
Yes, it was.
In the Capital One. They had torrential rains. They didn't have it covered. It was like playing in the slop, and it totally negated LSU's speed advantage. You could say, well, both teams were playing on the same field. That's true, but LSU was the faster team, and of course, when you get a slippery field, you have a slippery ball, and who fumbles it and who has the pass go through his hands. And Penn State ended up eking out a 19-17 victory. And I think after that, the Capital One Bowl people got artificial turf, or one of these new surfaces. They don't call artificial anymore, but they really are.
Yeah.
But that one was a big disappointment for LSU fans, yeah.
No question about that. And let me tell you, Neal, I sympathize with you guys being screwed over by a bad field. As a Jets fan, 1982 AFC title game at the Orange Bowl, Dolphins-Jets. Yes. It rains on Saturday. Shula doesn't put the tarp out. And Richard Todd ends up throwing 5 interceptions, including a famous one to A.J. Dewey, who is still going. So I
from LSU. A.J.
Dewey
Dewey from LSU.
That's right. Dewey did go to LSU. That's right. Oh, man. See that? I forgot about that. Yeah. And Richard Todd went to Alabama. Yeah,
he was a defensive lineman at LSU, but Shula switched him to a linebacker.
Oh, my God.
Probably one of the tallest linebackers in the league. I think he was about 6 feet 6. Yeah, he had a great game that day. And I remember watching that game. Yeah, it was again, the field was a disgrace.
14-0.
At least with Penn State won the home team. They didn't plan it that way, whereas the Dolphins were.
Oh, man alive. It's still it's probably the worst loss in New York Jets franchise history. And that's saying something because they've had some really bad losses.
Yeah.
So now let's get to the 2012 BCS national title game. I know you don't want to talk about it, but again, it's important to tell the story properly. Go ahead. Let me hear about it.
Well, first of all, we LSU fans were upset because they made us play Alabama again. It was like your reward for winning the game of the century is you have to beat them again. Well, it maybe wasn't as well known then as it certainly would be today, but beating Saban once is quite a feat. Having to beat him twice is unfair, And so I remember rooting mightily for Alabama to lose or at least win weekly, WEAKLY, so that they wouldn't rise to number 2. And I think that was the beginning of the end for Les Miles at LSU. LSU, let's face it, if you remember that game, it was 9-6. And they talked about, if this is the game of the century, this is a joke. And it was a defensive struggle. The number of future pro players, I think, on the field was like in the 30s. high
All on
20.
the defensive
Well, if you
side.
count the guys on, who were on the bench that would eventually become stars, it was in the
Well,
30s.
that's when LSU was DBU.
Yes. And Saban, quite honestly, coached a terrible game there. Terrible game.
Yes, he did.
And he had his wide receiver who hurt his ankle. He put him back in the game to receive a punt, and LSU was punting from deep in its territory. I believe it was the fourth quarter, and they had a chance all they needed was a field goal. And he gets off a booming punt, and their guy goes back, and he can't get to it. It bounces overhead, ends up being like a 60-yard punt. And they didn't get the good field position. And then he has his that same guy, I think, they're driving down the field. They still came back from that. They were driving down the field and, again, seeming to get in place for at least a field goal to win the game. You knew that the next team to score was going to win, or at least tie it at 9-9. And he suddenly decides, or his offensive coordinator decides, let's switch to a shotgun and have our wide receiver throw a pass. And he threw that pass at Eric Reed, if you remember that play, jumped up with the Alabama guy and intercepted right on the goal line, and that ended that threat. But that was not their regular quarterback. So then the game goes to, it was 6-6 at that point. The game goes to the field goal would have won. The game goes to overtime, and Alabama gets the ball first, and they called a terrible sequence of plays. The first play was like a Utah pass, and LSU snuffed it. And then they just went nowhere, and they did not have a good field goal kicker, which Saban made sure he never had that problem again. And so he tries a long field goal and missed. So all LSU needed was a field goal, and they went down inside the 10-yard line and kicked it. So Saban really did not coach a good game there. They should have won that game. And, of course, the odds of him coaching two bad games against the same opponent are slim and none. So that was – but Les Miles, as I said, at the beginning of the end for him, because Saban made significant changes in his offense. Obviously, both teams, neither one of you scored a touchdown. Both teams were great defenses, so you can't do the same thing again and expect to succeed. Well, Saban did some things with the tight end, put men in motion, and the LSU defense played their guts out. And it should have been more than 21-0 because the LSU offense, they didn't even past midfield, I think, until late in the second quarter or the second half. Miles did nothing new at all. He said, the option play hurt Alabama in the first game, so let's run that again. Well, you don't think they're going to prepare for that?
Right.
So that people really lost a lot of confidence in him at that point, and then he continued to have problems on the offensive side until finally they got tired of it and got rid of him.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Saban felt a little bit of extra motivation going up against the team that he used to coach? Or on the other end of things, do you think there was a sense of motivation of we want to beat the coach that was here and then left us for the pros? Was there any of that? Let me hear.
I think that was a factor, but I think LSU Alabama by that point had become the game for each team because of the quality of the teams, and that overrode everything else, that this is the team we have to beat if we want to be SEC champions, or in this case, this is the team we have to beat if we want to be BCS champions. The fact that there's a further connection between the two teams was maybe somewhat of a factor, but I don't know that influenced the players very much. I mean, by 2011, all the players that Saban coached were gone. So,
right.
But it was a factor with the fans. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Even today, that's always a factor with Alabama. I mean, personally, I don't have a hatred of Saban the way the a lot of LSU fans have. I mean, Saban didn't have a plan. I'm going to go to the Miami Dolphins for 2 years, and then I'm going to become the Alabama coach. No, that was, again, Alabama luck, you know. Saban, as I said, was reluctant to go to the pros, but he did, and after 2 years, and who knows, if Rich Rodriguez had taken that Alabama job, he might still be the Dolphins coach. Who knows? But everything broke right. So there was a lot of, from LSU's point of view, a lot of bad luck involved in him ending up at Alabama.
Yeah, definitely. Talking to Neal Golden, the author of LSU Bowl Games, A Complete History. And Neal, I'll get you out on this. I know you've been waiting to talk about this for a long time. What can you tell us about the Tigers Bowl Games during Joe Burrow's magical 2019 season?
It was just incredible. Burrow had actually shown a lot of improvement the previous year. I don't know if you remember, but the 2018 LSU team, which is the bowl game right before the one you asking about, against Central Florida, which was a really good team, and Burrow had an outstanding game against them, and they outscored a high-scoring team 40-32. So that was
right.
A preview of what was to come. And then they bring in Joe Brady, and he revs up the offense again. But you could already see the talent that Burrow had.
But no one thought he would throw 60 touchdowns that year.
No. That was beyond even the most optimistic dreams. But it all came together. Ed Ogeron was the beneficiary of it. He has a lot to do with it. I'm not saying he didn't, but a lot of it was the perfect storm from the point of view of the opposition. Everything coming together with Joe Brady and Burrow and the other outstanding players he had, and of course he held it all together and motivated the team and did what he does well, and just was and of course again the championship game was the game with Alabama, and
right.
At Alabama, and of course that was hard to put into words. What great elation, all of us LSU fans, to finally, we lost to them. The last time we had beaten them was that 2011 game we just talked about. And it was, I used to watch, I went to all the home games that year, and I used to watch, and I actually at times would feel sorry for the opponent. You had no chance, because if you double cover this guy, he's going to throw to this guy, and vice versa, you know. And when you just when you think you've got everything checked in the passing game, he's going to hand it off to Edward Salaire. That was another guy, you know, a cog that he blossomed that year.
Justin Jefferson too.
Yeah, Justin Jefferson, right. And all the ones that are proving their mettle in the NFL now, and but there was a preview of that at the Fiesta Bowl the year before to end that season, and all the latter part of that season, Burrow significantly improved. I mean, obviously he had the talent all along, even at Ohio State, but he was being given a chance to play in a system that would let him show what he could do. And so Brady coming in from the Saints and adding his extra stuff was just the perfect combination, and LSU's second Heisman Trophy winner was the outcome.
How much credit do you give?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. How much credit do you give Steve Ensminger, the offensive coordinator, for what Burrow did that year?
I give him a lot of credit because
Because wasn't Ensminger the play caller?
Yes. He put his ego aside. He was the offensive coordinator the year before, so that victory over UCF was his.
Yeah.
And his assistants, of course. But now Brady comes in, and Ensminger's an LSU grad. He played quarterback for LSU. He loves LSU, and he was willing Yeah, I'm open to this. And they had obviously a good symbiosis because he wasn't jealous of Brady, and Brady was quite willing to, let Insminger call the plays. The word was that Brady would more or less call first and second down, or Insminger third, or vice versa. There was some sharing there, and obviously Brady could make whichever one was going to take it, the other one would make suggestions, and so they worked together beautifully. And of course, also we always think of coaching as calling the plays during the game, but all the work they did with the quarterback and the receivers and the running backs and during the season to get them to the level that they played. I mean, I remember Oklahoma, they were just shell-shocked. It's just like a pass to the left, a pass to the right, a pass down the middle, pass into the end zone, touchdown. Just Oklahoma wasn't the greatest defense in the world, but they just
they gave up 63 points. I don't care if you're a good defense or not. It takes skill to put up 63 points.
Yeah, and that was the number 4 team in the country.
Right. Unreal.
So they were no slouch.
And the crazy
thing, in the championship game, they scored 42 on Clemson, and people usually don't question Clemson's defense. And
right.
That was all of the and of course all the points they scored on Alabama. That was all of those factors coming together, and so that's why I ended the book, with the 2019 championship game down here again. All 3 of LSU's championships have been won in New Orleans, with the thought that, as long as it goes something like this, as long as they play college football, any outstanding team will be compared to the 2019 LSU Fighting Tigers. That's how good.
No question, Neal. That was a fantastic LSU team. Burrow goes from being an undraftable prospect to the first overall pick. And man alive, do I hope he recovers fully from his injury. I want to see him tear up the NFL. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yeah, and don't you think he was showing a lot of promise?
No question.
Yeah.
No
and
question.
And he was with a poor team. The times
right.
Sometimes they give us the Cincinnati games down here because of Burrow, a game that otherwise wouldn't be of any interest to us. And, sometimes he was running for his life.
God. It was inevitable. It was inevitable that something was going to happen. It's just the way it happened, a fantastic rookie season in the making, and that's the way his season ended. Really, really unfortunate.
It was also touching to see the reaction of the players who hit him and the opponents.
Yeah, that was classic.
They respected him, and they had no intention of hurting him, but of course it's part of the game, and the concern and even regret or grief or whatever you want to put it that they had injured this guy. He's a very, very likable person, as well as his Heisman speech will, again, they're going to compare all future teams to the 2019 LSU Tigers. They're going to compare all future Heisman acceptance speeches to his. So he was just fell into our laps.
I have an autographed card of Joe Burrow, and it's looking like a very good investment right now. If he keeps up his play like it was shaken out to be his rookie year, he's going to be a very, very good quarterback for a long time.
Yeah, and let's hope the Bengals can build up their team around him. And get to the point where teams like the Saints and now Tampa Bay with their top quarterbacks, well, then that attracts the receivers and that attracts the running backs, and now a team that nobody wanted to play for becomes a desirable destination. But that's going to take years.
No question about that. I mean, the Chiefs went years, decades without being in a Super Bowl, back-to-back Super Bowls. The Buccaneers were only in one Super Bowl their whole history. They started out their franchise 0-26. They're now in the Super Bowl. Things can change like that in the NFL. It wouldn't surprise me if in a few years the Bengals were in the Super Bowl conversation. If Burrow turns into what we all think he can be, that's very, very possible, Neal.
And they draft wisely and have good free agent signings.
Right.
That's why the Saints have a guy that he's like director of player personnel who's overseen the drafts. The Saints had the 2017 draft, and the players from that draft, including I think Michael Thomas, they're all Michael. Their first 7 choices are all key components of offense and defense. And that turned it around, and then they added some more players and some more players. But unfortunately, as I said earlier, they've reached a point kind of the opposite of where Cincinnati is, where they can't afford all these guys anymore, and they're going to have to make some wise choices. Of course, they still have draft choices, and you can still have a good draft regardless of your salary cap situation. But
right.
The Saints are facing a crossroads. There's no doubt about that.
It's going to be interesting to see how things play out for you guys. All right, Neal, thank you very much for your time.
All righty.
All right, that was Neal Golden. His book is LSU Bowl Games, A Complete History. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro. Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. On Monday, you're going to get a big Super Bowl recap, along with me recapping any other big sports news. Also that night, you're going to get a New York Islanders show. Yes, there's still stuff to talk about with them, even though they haven't played in a while because the Sabres had a little bit of a COVID outbreak. But like I said, there's still stuff to talk about with my favorite hockey team. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that I'm like a tea bag. The flavor doesn't come out until you put me in hot water.